No, they all, as soon as it's like sometimes like the corporate media and the Democrats, they'll be up there and I'll just be like, man, these guys deserve to lose. They deserve to lose so much for so many different reasons. And like just the fact that she's Biden's vice president and just how just terrible of a president Joe Biden has been. And particularly, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, if you can call it a war, the assault of Gaza, is enough for me to be like, you deserve to lose.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Leftist Losers Show, where we point out all of the losers of the left. And today I got a clip from the Young Turks for you guys, where Dave Smith joined them to discuss, what's going on over in the Middle East, and then also, just the current political situation. And as usual, Dave Smith has some very based talking points, some very solid talking points, and he does a fantastic job of calling out the BS on both sides of the aisle. And I think, when you have Ana Kasparian and Cenk slowly starting to kind of have some more common sense takes, and I think that a lot of that stems from Ana Kasparian kind of going through her little cancellation period where she was attacked by the left for not wanting to be called a birthing person. That kind of opened her eyes a little bit to the garbage that the left pushes. And while she still has a lot of leftist, opinions and political positions, which I do not agree with, it is nice to see when somebody is more reasonable and at least willing to have a discussion. And I think that is starting to influence Cenk as well, as we see him kind of starting to go down that path, probably because he's in proximity of Ana Kasparian. And anyways, and of course, when they host people like Dave Smith, it should be praised, as Dave Smith is more of a voice of reason in today's political environment, which, we should definitely hold close to us, because it's important to have people like Dave Smith who aren't pushing for violence and attacks and just war at every turn they possibly can. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into this clip of Dave Smith calling out a lot of the woke BS and just discussing the current political environment and our choices coming up in the current election.
Yep. All right, now let's turn to domestic politics. So I know you thought Biden and Trump were a disaster. So now Kamala Harris is in the race. Does that change your mind at all? Are you leaning in one direction or another?
No, they all, as soon as it's like sometimes like the corporate media and the Democrats, they'll be up there and I'll just be like, man, these guys deserve to lose. They deserve to lose so much for so many different reasons. And like just the fact that she's Biden's vice president and just how just terrible of a president Joe Biden has been, and particularly the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, if you can call it a war, the assault of Gaza, is enough for me to be like, you deserve to lose. But every time then Donald Trump comes on TV and says something that's just like so terrible that I'm like, oh, I couldn't possibly support that. I mean, his thing the other day about how cops should have full immunity. He didn't even say qualified immunity. He just said full immunity, because I don't know that he knows the difference between the two. But and then I was just listening to his comments today about how Chuck Schumer's basically a Palestinian and all Jews have to vote for him because he's going to be so much more of a friend to Israel. So no, I can't support that. And Kamala Harris is just like everything I hate about politics. I mean, her, just her track record as a prosecutor, and it's not like she was one of these progressive prosecutors. She was like a Reaganite prosecutor, and so no, for me personally, nothing's changed there. The dynamics of the race have changed a lot.
Right.
Although I will say, I do think Kamala Harris is in the middle of a very astroturfed honeymoon phase, and I still think that she's going to have a very uphill battle winning an election against Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking about this for weeks now, or at least since she became the supposed nominee. She's not official yet. Yeah, her honeymoon period is completely fake. The hype, like The View, is constantly pushing fake hype for her. All of the media is pushing fake hype for her, and he's spot on with that. Dave Smith is very anti-Trump. I will say that. I don't agree with him on that. I'm not a huge Trump guy in terms of I'll support Trump no matter what, but I do think Trump is the right call in this current election. I think that Trump did a pretty good job and is definitely the best president of my lifetime. I'm a millennial. I was born in the 90s, and yeah, Trump's the best president that I've ever had since I've been alive. And he did a lot of things that weren't great. The red flag laws and the bump stock ban And some of the airstrikes and stuff he did in the Middle East, I don't necessarily agree with. But he didn't start any new wars. There was not a single conflict that started under Donald Trump. And at the same time, he actively pushed for diplomatic solutions. I mean, him walking across the DMZ into North Korea with no security detail was insane. I can't believe how much that was just like glossed over. Like a president of the United States during an active conflict walked into another country's like security zone and could have just been kidnapped or killed or whatever. But he did that. You know what? And as much as they demonized him for that, pretending like, oh, he's Kim Jong-un's best friend, so he's just a piece of garbage. No, not at all. That was an olive branch. Yeah, he talked a lot of smack to Kim Jong-un and things got a little hairy at first. But after, you know, that little alpha male demonstration between the two of them, like talking smack, he walked over there and shook the guy's hand. We should praise him for that. Like that's the diplomatic solutions that we want. We want to reach out to our enemies and at least attempt to say, hey, if you're reasonable, we'll be reasonable. We can coexist to some degree. And that's a better world to live in than just pushing for war constantly, which is what the establishment wants. At the end of the day, what they really want is endless wars so they can just keep making money and the military industrial complex can just stay rich. And the sad reality is a lot of the U.S. economy is propped up on those companies. And that's another big reason why the establishment won't let go of these endless wars they keep putting us into. Because if those wars disappear, you know, the economy might tank pretty badly. And I think that's a Band-Aid that just needs to get ripped off at this point. So Dave Smith, he won't ever come out and support Trump, but I think secretly he knows that Trump is at least a couple degrees further in the right direction. And that's how I view it, right? Donald Trump's not the perfect candidate, but I think out of all of the people, he is genuine in his love for the country. And I think that at the very least, another presidency under Trump would at least push us a little bit in the right direction. We won't get all the things we want. We won't probably get all the like prosecutions of all these evil, corrupt people like he says he'll do. It probably won't happen. But if we at least get the economy going in the right direction, if we at least start, pushing manufacturing back in the States and we start building up the American economy, just a little bit, I would prefer that over just the constant war and garbage pandering that the left pushes and that the Democrats push, and even the rhinos on the Republican side push. We don't need any more of that. That stuff needs to go away.
I never thought I would find myself in this position where I would disagree with a libertarian in regard to harsher prosecution, but I live in California, so I'm there. So, when I look at Kamala Harris's, record as a prosecutor, and I'm now currently living through a situation in which we have a district attorney like George Gascon refusing to prosecute even some of the most violent crimes, I think I would take the Kamala Harris prosecutor from the early, the 2010s versus what we're experiencing now. But I'm really curious what you think about that issue overall, right? Like right now, California seems to be taking a more libertarian approach when it comes to things like open air drug markets, when it comes to all sorts of crime, including, lowering the penalties from felony to misdemeanor, things like domestic violence, including strangling your partner, that kind of stuff. Like, do you think that's the correct approach, or would you want to moderate that?
No, that's crazy. It's like I'm a big believer in peaceful parenting. Like I don't believe in spanking or hitting your kids, and I'll talk about that sometimes. And then the responses from people who disagree with that will often be like, "Oh, so what? You can't instill any values in your kid?" And it's like, no, the choice isn't between like hitting your kid or abandoning your kid. Like there's some middle ground there. Mm-hmm. And so, the kind of what a lot of the progressive prosecutors ran on, campaigned on, sounded kind of libertarian. And I think there were a lot of fair criticisms they made of the previous generation of prosecutors, like the idea of like throwing people in jail for pot or even dealing pot, you know what I mean? Like is like, and giving these crazy sentences. I mean, there's still people, in your state who are serving life sentences for marijuana, even though someone's got a dispensary open, a few blocks away from where the prison is or whatever. And so essentially, like as a libertarian, my view is that the role of government, if there is a role for government, is the protection of people and property. And so what you had in the kind of Reaganite, Clintonite era, it was this like authoritarian crackdown on essentially non-violent victimless crimes where people were getting crazy drug sentences. And then the progressive prosecutors were like, hey, we don't want to do that. And even things like bail reform or something like that, at least to some degree can make sense. Like, look, it is kind of unfair that like, if you can raise the money, you get out, but if you can't raise the money, you can't get out. That doesn't exactly seem just. But then they took that and went, okay, so also we're not going to prosecute property crimes. We're essentially going to, like, as you were getting at with the domestic violence stuff, like quasi decriminalize some violent crimes, give out tickets for shoplifting, and then just allow the public streets to be completely overrun with homeless people and drug users and things like that. And to me, none of that has anything to do with libertarianism or just common sense. I mean, that's just like a recipe to destroy whatever area you live in. So
And Dave Smith's so right here, and he's kind of alluding to it, but he hasn't quite made the point yet. And what he's referring to are these prosecutors who used the authoritarian, crackdown on drugs, the war on drugs, as a way to swing the pendulum in the other direction. But instead of being reasonable and like level-headed about the whole situation, the population is effectively elected communist, leaders into positions like the district attorneys, who now let anyone on the left side of politics out into the street to steal. And they use the idea of, well, they're poor, so they're just going out there and we're redistributing wealth essentially by letting these people steal anything that's under $900 or whatever. It's effectively communism. It's terrorism in a sense, because these people are allowed to just terrorize the communities under the guise of, well, we don't want to be like we don't want to prosecute like we used to prosecute on drug charges and stuff. And the reality is, this stuff that they're letting people out on have nothing to do with the way they prosecute people in the past. And it's destroying California. Like, California is a nightmare right now. It's a dystopian nightmare. And it's crazy because, as the Young Turks are kind of trying to frame it as like, oh, well, they're being libertarian or anarchists. Yeah, they are in a way, but it's like, excuse me, it's like anarcho-communism. Because at the same time, California has the most strict laws on the books for everything, and the highest taxes, and the most insane social programs and nets, while also letting criminals out. That's basically what the USSR was. Like, the USSR, you weren't allowed to defend yourself. If somebody came up to fight you or stab you, and you fought back and killed or hurt the person, you would be charged. And they would say, well, that person's a criminal. You knew better. You shouldn't have done that. And that's basically how California is operating, right? These people are letting the crazies do whatever they want and then punishing anybody who opposes them, while at the same time having the strictest laws and the highest taxes. It's a communist regime. It's a communist regime. And the sad thing is, the people on the right, like the Reagan administration or the Reagan, era leadership, pushing, the right's ideas onto the people, brought the pendulum far enough to one side that, there was a reaction, and it swung way too far. And now you've got, the communists running the biggest and most wealthy, the most powerful state essentially by GDP in the union. And it's sad. It's pretty sad, but that's where we're at. That's where California is right now.
I would like to see, I think there should be enforcements against carjackings and shoplifting and things like that. These are not victimless crimes, and those should be illegal. And certainly choking your girlfriend or something like that should be extremely illegal with serious consequences. And I don't believe that homeless people should be allowed to set up encampments on public property. Public property is something that everybody has been forced to contribute to the creation and maintenance of. And so therefore, people should have some right of some say over what goes on there. But at the same time, just the only thing I'd push back on you is when you say like, oh, you'd rather go back to that world. I mean, I understand why. I probably would feel the same way if I was living in California, but you sure wouldn't feel that way if it was like your kid or your brother or something like this who caught like a 30-year sentence over, something that should just be legal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they're both bad options essentially.
Yeah. And you know what? He's not wrong. Again, I think Dave Smith pushes against Trump a little too much. Like, Trump does one bad thing and Dave Smith's like, oh, well, I could never vote for that. But the reality is, we're never going to get a perfect candidate. And that's kind of the downfall of the libertarians, in a sense, is they're perfectionists in their policy. And I don't blame them. We should strive and set the bar high. I do agree with him in terms of Trump should be called out when he does terrible things. But I think the options are pretty, if you pay attention to politics and the situation of the country, I think it's pretty clear on who you should vote for. And I think secretly Dave Smith would probably vote for Trump just because he knows that the country will at least move somewhat in the direction that he wants to see it in. But to his point about, prosecuting people for years for the drug charges, he's specifically, tilting, nodding to the takedown of Kamala Harris during the presidential debates during the 2020s. When Biden was first running to take Trump during the Democratic primaries, Kamala Harris was in the race. And I think people forget that because she dropped out so quickly because Tulsi Gabbard absolutely destroyed her on her record. There's a short clip of during one of the first presidential primary debates for the Democratic Party in 2019 where Tulsi Gabbard actually absolutely destroys Kamala Harris, calling out the fact that she was prosecuting people for minor drug charges and putting them in prison for years so that way she could fill up the prisons and then use the prison population to fight forest fires in California. Because California has laws that allows them to use prisoners to fight forest fires. It's almost like modern day slavery. On top of that, she was withholding evidence. Her office specifically was withholding evidence that would have basically proven a man on death row not guilty, and he would have been able to go free, but instead her office withheld that information, which is insane. That's absolutely evil that they would ever do that, but she did that. Her office did that. And when Tulsi Gabbard called that stuff out, Kamala Harris tanked. She was already doing terrible in the polls, but she tanked, and that's when she dropped out. And then all of a sudden, Joe Biden goes, oh, well, I need to pick a woman of color to be my vice president. And instead of picking Tulsi Gabbard, a woman of color, he picked Kamala Harris. Why? Because Tulsi Gabbard actually is a reasonable person. She's actually willing to push against the establishment, and Joe Biden is the epitome of the establishment. I mean, he is the establishment, essentially. Like, he is the perfect avatar of the establishment. So, of course, he's not going to pick somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. He picked Kamala Harris, who literally had no leverage over Joe Biden because she did so terribly. Like, how is she going to convince him to do anything? He's basically effectively handing her, a free pass by saying, oh, I'll make you vice president. So she's got nothing. She's got no leverage at all in that relationship. On top of the fact that she, apparently slept her way into power. So she's already got the type of personality to just be like, oh, cool, you're handing me something for free. Okay, well, I'm your best buddy. I'll do whatever you want. The loyalty thing. Which is really funny and blatantly obvious because she called Joe Biden a racist in the debates and then dropped out and became his VP. It's hilarious, right? So anyways, I think I appreciate Dave Smith's opinions. I think he is relatively level-headed. I think he's a little too anti-Trump in the situation that we're in, where Trump's honestly the only semi-reasonable option that we have. You look at the Libertarian Party specifically, and they effectively selected a communist to be their person. So yeah, who knows, with Chase Oliver. So who knows, whether he votes for him or not. I still think that Dave makes good points. I think he does a fantastic job of calling out the BS on both sides. And so I think it is worth listening to him. And so that's why I wanted to bring this clip to you guys. And it is, again, on the same note with the Young Turks. It's good to see them make some reasonable points and not fly off the rails unhinged with TDS. And so anytime they do this, I like to call it out and give them a shout out for that. So anyways, I hope you guys appreciated this content. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate all you guys, and comment down below what you guys think, or your opinion on the current political situation. And yeah, I know if you hated it, tear me apart in the comments. Either way, I appreciate all of you, and I hope you all have a fantastic evening.